Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The maps were spread out, markers scattered, dust still clinging to the edges of the laminated sheets. Commanders leaned forward, pointing, voices sharp, quick, decisive. She sat at the edge, her pen tapping once against the empty notepad in front of her. No one asked for her input. No one even looked at her. To them, she was the afterthought. The extra seat in the corner. The one they had been told to include, but never trust. Her fingers tightened around the pen. She could feel her pulse at the tip of her thumb, hear the faint scratching of boots against the concrete floor. And under it all, that steady low hum of the generator outside, the one sound that never stopped in this base. They called her too weak for combat, not directly, never to her face in plain words, but in the way they dismissed her in planning, in the way their eyes slid past her rifle on the rack as though it didn't belong to her, in the way they reassigned her name to the bottom of every rotation. But she stayed silent, because silence was safer. Alpha Team pushes North Ridge. Bravo flanks the village. Charlie, the commander's finger tapped the edge of the map, covers the fallback. Charlie Team, that was her, the scraps, the ones meant to react, not decide. Her jaw flexed, but her lips stayed still. Because what could she say? That she knew the terrain better than half the room, that she'd memorized the contours, the blind angles, the streams that cut through dust like veins, that she'd spent nights awake, sketching every possible enemy path in the margins of her notebook. No one wanted to hear it. And yet, as she watched the plan unfold, as the ink stained across ridges and markers clattered against laminated valleys, she saw something none of them had marked. A gap, a weakness. But she didn't speak. Not yet. The room smelled faintly of sweat, old coffee, and the dry metallic taste of gun oil. Outside, somewhere beyond the thin walls, boots hit gravel in steady rhythms, soldiers preparing for movement. The mission would begin in less than 2 hours. And she knew something in her chest, in the pit of her stomach, that it wouldn't go the way they thought. Not unless someone was willing to stand where no one else wanted to. The barracks were nearly empty when she returned. Everyone else had gone to the armory, to the vehicles, to the noise of preparation. She moved quietly. Her boots made almost no sound on the concrete floor. Her locker creaked softly when she opened it, and there, lined up with care that bordered on ritual, was her weapon. Not the standard issue rifle. Hers. Every scratch told a story. Every mark on the stock carried a memory. She lifted it with both hands, let the weight settle against her shoulder. She exhaled and the familiar rhythm returned. Calm, steady. A sniper's calm. That was her strength, not the chaos of rushing buildings, not the roar of engines or the thunder of mortars, but patience, stillness, waiting until the moment mattered most. It wasn't weakness, but they had never understood that. Her hands traced the barrel, checking every detail. The bolt slid back with a soft click, smooth, precise. She checked the optics, adjusted the dials by instinct, not thought. When she closed her eyes, she saw the ridge again. The map, the place where the markers didn't cover. She pictured herself there, alone, holding the line. The thought wasn't fear, it was certainty. Her chest tightened, not from doubt but from memory. Because this wasn't just another mission, not for her. This place, this ground, this valley, they held pieces of her past that no one here knew, and she had never told them. Not yet. The ride out was dust and vibration, engines growling beneath the armored plates, the air heavy with exhaust and sand. Inside, the men shouted over the noise, laughing, arguing, checking gear. She sat against the wall, helmet tilted forward, hands resting on her weapon. Someone nudged her boot. Try not to slow us down out there. The words stung, not because they were new, but because they were familiar. She kept her eyes down, lips pressed together. Silence again, because answering would change nothing. But she noticed the soldier who said it. His hand shook faintly when he reloaded his magazine. His bravado was louder than his courage, and she wondered if, when the time came, he would still speak so loudly. Her gaze drifted out the small armored window. The land stretched endless, harsh, broken by jagged ridges and burned villages. Smoke rose faintly in the distance, curling into the hot sky. The world looked quiet, almost too quiet. But quiet was never safe. She knew that. The commander's voice broke through the roar, 30 minutes out, eyes open. She touched the stock of her rifle, grounding herself. Her heartbeat slowed, her breath steadied. No one else remained calm like this before a mission. That was her gift and her curse. They dismounted in the dust. The air smelled of dry earth, sweat, and faint gunpowder, traces of battles already fought. The sun burned overhead, relentless, shadows sharp against the ground. Orders were shouted, teams split, boots scattered in different directions. She moved with Charlie team falling into position. She could feel the weight of glances, the subtle doubt that followed her steps. She ignored it, focused on the land, the wind, the angle of the light. Every detail mattered. They set up on a ridge overlooking the valley. The village below looked empty, too empty. A soldier beside her muttered, "Not a soul down there." But she knew better. Stillness was the enemy's mask. Her scope lifted. She scanned rooftops, windows, alleys. Nothing moved. Yet the silence pressed against her ears like a weight. She adjusted the dial, focused on the far edge of the village, and there, just for a second, a flicker of light, a reflection. Her breath caught. Her finger hovered. She didn't fire, not yet. Because patience mattered, timing mattered. But she knew then they weren't alone. The ambush came fast. A crack split the air, sharp as thunder. One soldier dropped before the sound even reached them. Then another. Screams, chaos, dust rising. Bullets tore the ridge apart, stone splintering, dirt exploding. Voices shouted, scrambled, desperate. The commander yelled for cover, but cover was scarce. The valley lit with fire, muzzle flashes hidden in windows, on rooftops, in the unseen places of the village. She pressed flat against the rock, pulse steady despite the chaos. Her scope rose, one breath in, one breath out. And then silence in her head. The noise muted, the screams distant. The world narrowed to a single target in her glass. She squeezed, the recoil nudged her shoulder. One flash silenced. Her eyes shifted, another rooftop, another shadow. Breath, focus, fire. The chaos didn't stop. But around her, soldiers felt it, the brief relief, the invisible hand holding back the tide, even if only for seconds. No one saw her face. No one called her name. But in those moments when the line threatened to break, it was her finger, her calm, her silence that kept it from shattering. By the time dusk fell, smoke curled over the valley. The air was thick, choking, painted orange by the sinking sun. Casualties lay covered, silence heavy over their forms. The survivors sat in small groups, eyes hollow, voices low. She sat alone, rifle resting against her knee, gaze fixed on the horizon. No one thanked her. No one said her shots had turned the tide. But deep down she knew the truth, and she also knew this was only the beginning. Because the gap she had seen on the map, the weakness they ignored, had opened today. And if someone didn't stand there, didn't hold it when the real storm came, the entire line would collapse. She had seen it. She had felt it. And she also knew when that day came, no one else would remain. What made her volunteer for this place, for this mission, for this war that had already swallowed so many? The others never asked. To them, she was just another name on the roster, another uniform in the line. But inside, she carried a reason far heavier than her pack, heavier than the rifle she cleaned each night with quiet devotion. And tonight, as the camp lay heavy with the aftertaste of blood and smoke, she couldn't stop her mind from drifting back. She sat near the dim lantern, alone. Her gloves off, her hands raw, dust ground deep into the lines of her skin. Around her, the men murmured in low voices, trading cigarettes, sharing water from dented canteens. One told a story about his daughter's birthday back home. Another cursed softly at the pain in his leg. She listened, not because she belonged in the circle, but because their voices made the silence less sharp. "Your shot saved my ass today," someone muttered near her. She didn't look up, didn't even move. Maybe he hadn't meant for her to hear, maybe he had. It didn't matter, she wasn't here for thanks. But when she finally lay down on the hard ground, helmet propped against her pack, her eyes refused to close. The stars overhead stretched infinite, sharp against the black sky. The night air was cold, thin, biting at the edges of her breath. And in the stillness, a memory returned, one she had tried to bury. Her brother's face. That final phone call. The silence that followed. He had been stationed not far from here years ago. His letters were short, practical, but his voice on the phone was always steady. Until that last call. She remembered how he paused too long between words, how his laughter felt forced, how he whispered at the end, "Don't let them forget me." And then the news came. Patrol ambushed, no survivors. She was told not to ask questions, told it wouldn't change anything, told to move on. But how do you move on when the only person who ever believed in you disappears into a line of statistics? So she didn't move on. She enlisted, trained harder than her body thought it could endure, chose the role no one wanted, learned to wait, to watch, to strike with precision, because she knew somewhere, somehow, this ground would speak the truth about what happened. And maybe, if she listened long enough, she'd hear his voice again. At dawn, the air smelled of ash and burned metal. The survivors packed in silence. The bodies were loaded with care, but the commander's voice was sharp, pressing them to move faster. War did not wait for grief. She moved methodically, rolling straps, securing gear, checking ammo. One of the younger soldiers, barely more than a boy, freckles still visible under the layer of dirt, sat slumped against his pack, shaking. His rifle lay across his knees, untouched. His eyes stared past it, hollow. She paused, looked at him for a long moment, then crouched, her voice low, steady. "Check your weapon." He blinked as if waking from a dream. His lips trembled. I can't," I froze out there. Her hand touched the stock of his rifle, firm, grounding. "So don't freeze next time." His eyes darted to hers, searching, expecting maybe judgment, maybe pity, but she gave him neither, only that one quiet truth. And for a moment he breathed steadier. She stood, adjusted her strap, walked on. The boy would either carry her words with him or let them slip. Either way, she had given him something, the same thing no one had ever given her: belief. They moved again by mid-morning. The heat was brutal, pressing down with relentless weight. Dust clung to sweat, turning skin to mud. Every step rattled through bone. The village they had secured was abandoned, too dangerous to hold. The order came down: push further east toward the ridge line. The ridge. Her chest tightened, because she knew this ground. She had seen it before, in her brother's old photographs. In the sketch maps he had mailed home, folded and creased, smudged by his fingers. It was the same terrain, the same path he had patrolled. She said nothing. Not yet. But the silence inside her wasn't empty. It was sharp, alive. Because if this was the place, then maybe the truth wasn't far. By afternoon, their pace slowed. The commander ordered a halt near a ruined farmhouse, its walls scorched, roof half-collapsed. They set a perimeter, posted guards. Some dozed in the shade of broken beams. Others cleaned their rifles, their motions mechanical, practiced. She found herself drawn to the edge of the ruin, where the land opened into the valley. From here, the ridges stretched endless, jagged lines against the sky. Her scope lifted. The glass cut the distance into sharp detail. A lone goat wandered near the rocks. The wind carried dust like a veil. And then movement. She froze. Far out near the slope, a figure slipped between rocks, distant, almost invisible, too deliberate for a villager, too careful for chance. Her breath held. She tracked him, slow, patient, his rifle slung low, his head turning back, signaling. There were more. She lowered the scope, heartbeat steady, but inside something twisted. This wasn't random. This was preparation. She turned, moving fast toward the commander. Movement on the ridge. At least 3, maybe more. They're scouting. The commander glanced at her, irritation flashing. We've been here 5 minutes. Could have been anything. It wasn't anything. Her voice was sharper now, but calm, controlled. They're watching us. He hesitated. The weight of doubt still lingered in his eyes. And in that hesitation, the choice hung heavy. That night the farmhouse was too quiet. The men slept in uneasy shifts. The boy with freckles tossed, muttering in his sleep. The commander walked the edge, boots crunching against rubble. She didn't sleep. She stayed with her rifle, eyes scanning the darkness, ears tuned to every shift of the wind. And then she heard it. Not the wind, not the creak of broken wood, but a faint metallic click, too far for most to notice, too familiar for her to mistake. She lifted the rifle, scope slicing the black, and there it was, a glint, a reflection, someone watching them. Her finger steadied, but she didn't fire, not yet. Because she knew this was only the beginning. By morning the trap closed. Gunfire ripped through the walls, splintering wood, kicking dust into choking clouds. Shouts filled the air. The farmhouse shook under the impact of mortars. Men scrambled, firing blindly, panic thick. The boy froze again, his rifle useless in his hands. She pulled him down, her voice sharp, cutting through the chaos. Breathe, aim, fire. His hands shook, but this time he lifted the rifle. Fired, missed, fired again. The third shot found its mark. And something changed in his eyes. She didn't stay to watch. Her scope was already back up, her breaths even, her shots precise. One after another, she cut down the shadows moving against the ridge. But the farmhouse was breaking. The line was too thin. The commander shouted for retreat, for fallback. She scanned again, and there in the distance beyond the ridge she saw it, the same path her brother had marked in his letters, the place where his patrol had vanished. Her chest tightened. Her breath caught. This was it. The same ground. And in that moment she knew this mission wasn't just theirs, it was his. And she wasn't leaving. How long can someone stay silent before the truth breaks through? The farmhouse still smoldered. Smoke curled from shattered beams, mixing with the dawn light in pale ribbons. The survivors had pulled back to a rocky ridge, breathless, dust-caked, their faces gray with exhaustion. Some carried the wounded. Others carried nothing but the hollow weight of shock. She sat apart, rifle across her lap, eyes locked on the valley below. The echoes of gunfire still lived in her ears, sharp, unrelenting. The boy with freckles sat nearby, his chest heaving. His rifle rested against his knees, and though his hands still shook, there was a faint change in his expression. Not confidence, not yet, but something like survival. The commander's voice cut the morning air, harsh, angry, trying to mask the fear behind command. We move east, keep distance, stay sharp. If they're hunting us, they'll press again. His eyes flicked to her once, only once. But in that glance she felt it, the unspoken question. Had she been right? Were they being watched all along? He didn't say it aloud. He didn't have to. She turned back to the valley. The sun rose higher, lighting the slopes in harsh gold. Every rock cast a long shadow, and in those shadows she imagined the shapes of men, rifles glinting, eyes waiting. Her hand tightened on the stock of her weapon, because she knew, imagined or not, they were there. The march was brutal. Heat pressed down like iron. Boots ground over stone, blistering feet, bending knees. The ridge line stretched endless, each turn revealing another climb, another valley, another silence that felt too heavy. Men muttered under breath, some cursed, some fell silent, saving what strength they had left. The boy stumbled more than once, but each time he caught himself, jaw set with quiet determination. She walked near the back, her pace steady, rifle secured. Her eyes never left the ridges above. Her ears tuned to the smallest sound, a dislodged rock, a faint metallic scrape. Nothing, but nothing could be worse than noise. Hours passed. Sweat burned her eyes, streaked mud down her neck. Her pack dug trenches into her shoulders. Still, her breath remained calm, steady. She had learned long ago that endurance was not about strength but silence inside. And yet silence can be dangerous, because silence hides truths too heavy to speak. By evening they reached a dry stream bed, its rocks smooth, its banks steep. The commander called halt, ordered a perimeter. Men collapsed into shade, pulling off helmets, gulping water. She stayed alert. The land pressed in close here. The high banks offered cover, too much cover. She set her rifle on the rise, glass scanning the distance. Shadows stretched long, the air cooled, the silence deepened. And then a sound. Low, subtle, a metallic scrape. Not from her men, from the ridge. Her scope snapped, she froze. A figure half hidden behind a rock, glass raised, not a rifle, binoculars, watching. Her breath steadied, her finger brushed the trigger. But the figure slipped back before she could fire. She lowered the scope, her jaw clenched. Scouts again. She rose, moving fast toward the commander. We're being tracked. Ridge, north side. They've been watching us all day. The commander looked at her, exhaustion pulling his features tight. We've all been watched. It's their ground. They're not just watching, they're hurting. Her voice stayed low, firm. They're pushing us east, into something. His silence was answer enough. He didn't believe her. Or worse, he did, but couldn't change course now. She stepped closer. Her voice dropped, sharp, cutting through. This is where my brother's patrol vanished. That made him stop. His eyes hardened. This isn't about your brother. Her chest tightened. It's about the ground. Look at the maps. Look at the valleys. It's the same routes, the same ridges. They're pushing us to the same place. The commander's jaw worked, but he turned away. Get back to your post. And just like that, her words fell into silence. Again. That night she didn't sleep. The men dozed in fits, rifles clutched tight. The boy slept near her, his breath uneven, his fingers twitching as if firing in dreams. The commander paced, but slower now, shoulders heavy. She sat with her rifle, eyes scanning the darkness. The stars burned sharp above, the air cold enough to bite. Her brother's voice echoed in her memory. Don't let them forget me. But they had, everyone had. Even here his name meant nothing, his story was dust, his patrol erased. Unless she made it matter. Her grip tightened. Her chest rose with slow resolve. She wouldn't let silence bury him. The next morning they broke camp. The valley ahead narrowed, ridges squeezing tight, a natural funnel, a perfect trap. She walked close to the commander, her voice sharp. We can't go in there, too narrow, too high on both sides. We don't have another route. His tone was final. Her eyes burned into his. Then we don't walk in blind. Put me on the ridge. Let me cover the line. His jaw set. You'll slow us down. She stepped closer, her voice low, controlled, but edged with something hard. I won't. But if you don't put me there, you'll lose more men. You know it. For a moment, silence hung heavy. The men shifted, listening without looking. The boy's eyes flicked between them, wide, uncertain. Finally, the commander exhaled. Fine, one ridge, but don't fall behind. It wasn't trust, not fully, but it was the first time her voice had cracked the silence. She nodded, didn't thank him, just turned, adjusted her rifle, and started up the slope. Her boots scraped stone, her breath deepened. The climb burned, but she didn't slow. Each step carried weight not just of her gear but of something heavier. Because now, for the first time, she wasn't just watching, she was choosing. Choosing to hold where no one else wanted. The ridge stretched sharp above the valley. From here she saw everything. The line of men below, their helmets glinting. The rocks ahead narrow, dark. The air heavy with waiting. She settled into position, scope raised. Her breath slowed. Her heartbeat softened. The valley looked empty, silent, but silence lies. Her glass swept the ridges opposite. Nothing, rocks, shadows, dust. Then a flicker. Ahead, a rifle barrel, a shape moving low. Her breath held, her fingers steadied. She fired. The shot cracked the silence, echoed across the stone. The figure dropped. Shouts erupted from the opposite ridge. Figures spilled from cover, rifles rising. The trap had been set, the funnel alive with fire. Her men below scrambled, pressed to rocks, returning fire. Chaos echoed, dust exploded, bullets screamed. She stayed still, calm, each breath a metronome, each shot a cut in the storm. One fell, then another, then another. The boy below fired, his face tight with fear but steadier now. The commander shouted orders, pulling men into cover. But the storm pressed harder. The enemy poured from ridges, relentless fire raining down. She shifted, adjusted, fired again, her body still, her mind silent. And in that silence she heard him. Her brother. His voice faint but certain. Don't let them forget me. Her eyes stung, her chest ached, but her hands never wavered. Because here, now, she would not let him be forgotten. The fight stretched long, too long. The sun rose high, heat burning the stone. Smoke curled, screams echoed, the valley shook. But still the line held. Not because of strength. Not because of numbers. But because one voice, once silenced, had finally spoken. And from her place on the ridge, she swore she would hold it, even if no one else remained. How many times can a line bend before it finally breaks? The valley roared with fire. Dust hung thick, choking the air, filling mouths and lungs with grit. The crack of rifles rolled off the ridges, sharp, relentless. Bullets kicked stone into shards, whistled past ears, split the silence into chaos. From her place on the ridge she held steady, breath slow, finger calm, one target at a time. The recoil nudged her shoulder like an old rhythm, each shot carving a fraction of order from madness. Below, her men scrambled between rocks, pressed into dirt, faces smeared with sweat and fear. The commander shouted orders, his voice raw from strain. The boy fired wildly at first, then steadied, finding rhythm through desperation. Still the storm pressed harder. The enemy knew the ground better. They poured from ridges, firing from angles unseen, closing the funnel with ruthless precision. Her jaw clenched, her heart beat steady. She whispered under her breath, words no one heard. Not here, not today. Her scope cut the distance. Another figure rose. She fired, he fell. Another moved. She adjusted, fired, another silence. But no matter how many fell, more came. Shadows endless, faceless, pouring down the stone. And in the chaos she felt it, the line was bending, too far. By midday the sun blazed overhead, searing skin, blinding eyes. Sweat-stung wounds turned dust into mud on their faces. Ammunition ran thin. Every shot counted now. Every movement had weight. The commander crawled up the slope, sliding into cover near her. His face was streaked with dust, his eyes bloodshot. We can't hold this. We need to pull back. Her scope stayed raised. Pull back and they'll cut us down before we take 10 steps. He spat into the dirt. Then what? Die here. She didn't answer, not with words. Her shot answered for her. A rifleman on the far ridge dropped, his muzzle flash snuffed. The commander stared at her for a long second, his breath ragged, his jaw tight. For the first time there was no dismissal in his eyes, only recognition. Then tell me, he said finally, where do we hold? She exhaled slow. Her hands adjusted the scope, sweeping the ridges. Her voice came low, steady. "That outcrop, north side, higher ground, we shift there now or we don't last another hour." He hesitated, looked back at the men, looked at her. And for the first time he nodded. The retreat was chaos. Men moved low, sprinting between rocks, covering each other in bursts. Bullets screamed past, stone shattered. Shouts mixed with screams, with silence too heavy for words. She moved last, always last, covering their backs, her shots holding the enemy just long enough for another man to move. Then another, then another. Her pack felt heavier. Her throat burned dry. Her heart hammered, but her hands stayed calm. Because calm was survival. When the last of them stumbled into cover at the outcrop, only 19 remained, out of 32. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. They collapsed into the shade of the rock. Some tore open shirts to bind wounds. Others simply stared, empty-eyed. The boy sat hunched, his hands bloodied, not his own. His rifle lay across his lap, forgotten. The commander leaned against the stone, his face gray, his chest heaving. He didn't shout now. His voice was low, almost breaking. We can't keep this up." She crouched near her rifle, checking the chamber, counting rounds. 12 left, 12 lives. Her voice came quiet, almost to herself. "They won't stop until this ridge is empty." The commander looked at her, "And when it is?" She didn't answer because they both knew. When it was empty, it meant they were gone. That night the survivors huddled in silence. The wind howled across the ridge, carrying dust like whispers. The stars above were sharp, cold, indifferent. She sat apart, rifle cradled against her knees, eyes scanning the darkness. Her body ached, her throat burned, but her mind stayed awake, alive. The boy shuffled close, his face pale in the starlight. He sat beside her, knees drawn up, rifle across his legs. For a while he said nothing. Then, softly, almost afraid of the words, "How do you not break?" She glanced at him. His eyes were wide, searching, desperate. Her gaze returned to the valley. Her voice was low, steady. "You don't think about breaking, you think about holding. One breath, one shot, one moment at a time." He swallowed, nodded faintly. His lips trembled, but he didn't speak again. And in the silence that followed, she thought of her brother, his voice, his laughter, the way he had once told her the same thing, one breath at a time. That's all it is. Her throat tightened, her chest ached, but she didn't let it show, not here, not now. By dawn, the enemy pressed again. This time quieter, sharper, not a storm, but a blade. Small groups moving low, circling, probing. She saw them first. Her scope caught the flicker of movement against stone, a shadow where it shouldn't be. Her shot cracked, one figure fell. The men jolted awake, scrambling into position. The commander barked orders, his voice stronger now, carrying weight, not just command, survival. She shifted position, scanning, firing, shifting again, each shot measured, each breath steady. The boy fired beside her. Not wild now, controlled, his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed. He missed some, hit others, but he no longer froze. She glanced at him once, just once, and saw it, a spark. Not courage, not yet, but the beginning of it. And for the first time, she felt something like hope. Hours dragged, the sun rose higher, ammunition dwindled, water ran low. The men's eyes hollowed, their faces slack with exhaustion. The commander crawled to her side, his voice low. "We won't last another push." She kept her scope raised. "Then we don't let them push, we push back." He stared at her. "With what? We're running dry." Her breath steadied, her voice stayed calm. "Then we use what's left, smart, precise. Hold them until nightfall. If they can't break us by dark, they'll pull back." His jaw tightened, his eyes searched hers. And for the first time he didn't argue. Because he believed her. The next assault came hard, brutal. Smoke grenades filled the air, thick burning eyes choking lungs. Shadows surged through the haze, rifles spitting fire. The ridge shook. Men shouted, coughed, fired blindly. Chaos threatened to split the line apart. She stayed still, her scope cut through gaps in the smoke, her shots precise, carving holes in the advance. Beside her the boy coughed, eyes red but kept firing. His voice cracked through the haze, hoarse but strong. "I see them, left ridge." She followed his call, fired, another fell. The men rallied. The commander's voice rose, sharp, cutting through. Hold the line." And somehow they did. By dusk the ridge was quiet again. Smoke drifted, curling into the orange sky. The bodies of enemy fighters lay scattered on the slope. The survivors sat slumped, rifles across knees, too exhausted to speak. The boy collapsed beside her, chest heaving, eyes bloodshot. He looked at her, lips cracked, voice raw. We made it." She didn't answer, not yet. Because in her chest, something ached deeper than exhaustion. She looked out at the valley, at the path below, at the ridges that twisted east. And she knew this wasn't the end. This was the same ground where her brother had fallen, and the storm that had swallowed him had not finished. Not yet. And she would not leave until she knew the truth. What does silence sound like when you know it won't last? The ridge lay still in the pale dawn, but the stillness was not peace. It was a pause, a breath before another storm. The survivors knew it. She knew it most of all. Her eyes traced the valley floor, searching for movement in the long shadows. Her cheek pressed against the stock of her rifle, scope sweeping stone by stone, brush by brush. Nothing yet, but she felt it, like pressure in her chest. The boy stirred beside her, half asleep, his hand still resting on his rifle. He blinked into the light. "They'll come again, won't they?" She didn't look away from the scope. "Yes." His throat bobbed. He said nothing more. The men behind them sat quiet, hollow-eyed, scattered along the outcrop. Some cleaned rifles that barely had rounds left. Some just stared at the ground, lips moving with words only they could hear. The commander crouched near her, running a hand through his dirt-caked hair. He didn't bark orders now. He didn't need to. His men looked to her more than him. And maybe he felt it too, that she wasn't just holding the line, she was holding them. By midday, heat pressed down like a weight. Their canteens were nearly empty. The sun baked stone until it burned to touch. She crawled back from her post, sliding into the narrow shadow of the rock wall. She pulled a folded scrap from her vest pocket, worn soft from handling. A letter. Her brother's handwriting, smudged from sweat and time. She had read it 100 times before, but here, the words cut deeper. "If you ever hear that I didn't make it back, don't let it break you. Promise me that. Some lines aren't meant to be held forever, but if you're there and you're the last one standing, don't move. Don't run, stay. Someone has to." Her fingers trembled slightly. She closed the letter, tucked it away, and when she lifted her eyes, the commander was watching her. His voice came quiet, almost curious. That was his, wasn't it? She nodded. He leaned back against the stone. His face was weary, eyes hollow. "I heard about him, the day he fell. They said he kept firing long after the rest were gone, bought time for the last evacuation." Her jaw tightened, and still they called him reckless. The commander looked away toward the valley. His voice broke faintly. "They always do, until they need someone just like him." For a moment there was silence between them, not heavy, just honest. Late that afternoon the boy stumbled back from the slope, his hands shaking, dust covering his face. "I found something," he whispered. She stood quickly, rifle slung across her shoulder. "Show me." He led her down a jagged path into a shallow cut of stone. There, half buried in dirt and sand, was a shattered rifle, rusted, scarred, its stock cracked. She froze, because carved faintly into the wood, almost worn away, were 3 initials. His initials, her brother. Her chest tightened, her breath caught. The world seemed to narrow around the rifle, around the truth in front of her. She crouched, running her fingers over the wood, tracing the letters. The weapon was long dead like its owner, but it had been here. He had been here. Her brother had stood on this very ground, and now she knew this wasn't just any battle. This was the battle, the one he had not walked away from. The boy's voice was small, almost a whisper. It was him, wasn't it? She didn't answer, couldn't, her throat closed, her chest burning. But she nodded once. That night, when the stars scattered cold light across the valley, she sat apart from the others. The rifle lay across her knees, the broken one propped against stone beside her like a ghost. The commander approached slowly, crouching down nearby. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at the rifle. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "They told us the story different," he said, his voice low, reflective. "They said his unit collapsed, said he disobeyed orders, held when he should have retreated. That's how they wrote it down." She gripped the stock of the broken rifle. "And what do you believe?" His jaw worked. He exhaled slowly. "I believe men like him aren't written right, not in reports, not in records, they're written here." He tapped his chest. "In the ones who survived because of them." Her throat tightened. Her eyes burned, but she blinked the heat away. She would not cry, not here, not now. Because tomorrow they would come again. And they did. At dawn the enemy returned, not in waves, not in chaos, but in silence. Cunning. Small groups slipping through shadows, closer, closer. A different tactic, a final squeeze. Her scope caught the first. She fired. The shot cracked the morning open. Then the valley erupted again. Figures surged through stone, rifles blazing. The survivors scrambled, shouting, firing back. The ridge shook under fire. The boy crouched low, firing steady. The commander bellowed orders, voice hoarse but unyielding. She moved calm, always calm. Her rifle barked rhythm, her breath measured, her hands steady. But inside she burned. Every shot was his shot. Every breath was his breath. She held because he had once held. She fought because he had fought. And she swore, here, in the roar of gunfire, that she would not let his sacrifice fade into silence. Hours blurred into smoke and blood. They lost 2 more men. Another dragged himself into cover, bleeding, teeth clenched. Their numbers thinned. Their ammo bled out. By noon, the survivors were down to single digits. And still she stood, rifle hot, eyes steady, body trembling from exhaustion but refusing to break. The boy was beside her, his face streaked with dirt, blood drying on his temple. He didn't falter. He didn't freeze. He fought because she fought. The commander, too, stayed near. His voice cracked, but it carried. Hold it here." And for a fleeting moment, just one, she saw them not as broken men but as a line worth holding. When the firing finally stilled, when the enemy pulled back to regroup, the survivors slumped into the dirt. Their breaths came ragged. Their bodies sagged. The commander slid down the stone, his head in his hands, his voice low, barely a whisper. "We can't do another like that." She said nothing, just loaded her last magazine, 12 rounds. The boy sat beside her, watching her hands. His voice cracked. "We're not making it out, are we?" She looked at him, really looked, saw the fear in his eyes, the youth, the life not yet lived. Her voice was soft, firm. "If you're breathing, you're not done." He swallowed hard, nodded once, clutched his rifle tighter. And though she felt the weight pressing harder than ever, she knew she had to be the last to bend, the last to break. That night she lay awake under a sky of indifferent stars. The broken rifle leaned against her pack, silent witness. Her brother had stood here once, alone, the last. And now she understood what he meant in his letter. Sometimes the strongest thing wasn't surviving, it was staying. Holding. Not because you thought you'd win, but because you refused to leave. Her eyes closed, her breath slowed. And she whispered into the silence, "For you, for them, for me, I'll hold." And when the dawn came, she rose with it, rifle in hand, ready. Because she knew the storm wasn't done. Not yet. How do you measure the distance between breaking and holding on? Dawn cracked sharp, the horizon glowing red like blood seeping through stone. The survivors rose stiff, hollow-eyed, bones aching, rifles heavy. Their faces were gray, streaked with grime, lips cracked from thirst. She stood first, she always did, rifle in hand, boots grinding against rock, eyes sweeping the valley. The boy followed, dragging himself upright, swaying slightly on his feet. His youth was nearly gone, carved away by fear and fire. Only his eyes betrayed it still, too wide, too alive. The commander stumbled last. He had lost his voice to shouting, his skin blistered from sun. But he stood because she stood, because leaving the ridge before her would feel like betrayal. And below, shadows gathered again. The enemy came not in waves this time, but as a tide, relentless, wide, everywhere at once. Gunfire snapped like whips, mortar rounds cracked stone, dust exploded into choking clouds. The ridge convulsed. Men hit dirt, rifles blazing, shouts tore the air. She dropped prone, scope raised, her breath steady. A figure appeared through haze, shot. Another shot. She didn't count, she didn't think. She only held. Every trigger pull echoed her brother's hand. Every breath echoed his last. Her shoulder bruised, her ears rang, her chest hammered with exhaustion, but her hand stayed sure. Calm was survival. The boy shouted beside her, voice hoarse. Left flank, they're moving up the slope. She pivoted, sighted, fired. A shadow fell, then another. Her voice was low, even through the storm. Keep calling, I'll cover. He did. And together, they bent the line back from breaking. But bending has a cost. By mid-morning, they were fewer still. One man bled out against stone, his hand clenched around a photo of children none of them had met. Another lay silent, eyes open to the sky, his lips parted as if still trying to speak. The commander staggered to her side, his shirt soaked dark at the shoulder. A bullet had grazed deep. His face was ashen. He coughed, spitting blood. We're not walking out of this. She reloaded calmly, sliding the bolt closed. Then we don't think about walking, we think about holding. His eyes searched hers, and for the first time he didn't argue. He just nodded and went back to the line. The boy crawled close, dirt streaked across his face, his voice trembling. Why do they keep coming? We've bled enough. Haven't they bled enough? She kept her scope raised, eyes tracking movement. They don't count blood like we do. For them, it's just ground, just orders, not faces, not names. He was quiet, then softly, then why do you stay? Her breath hitched, just for a beat. Her eyes stayed on the scope, but her voice lowered, heavy, because someone once stayed for me. And in that moment, she wasn't just speaking to him. She was speaking to the silence, to the ghost of her brother. The battle surged harder. Grenades shattered stone. Fragments tore into skin, into bone. The survivors screamed, staggered, crawled into cover. She stayed where the ridge was thinnest, where the push was heaviest. Her rifle roared, her shoulder bruised deeper, her cheek pressed raw against stock. The boy was at her side, coughing blood from smoke, firing ragged but steady. His voice cracked with every call. 3 o'clock, rocks moving. She answered with steel. But the tide pressed closer. At one point the line almost broke. 3 shadows climbed fast, cutting through smoke, rifles raised. The boy froze, panic gripping him. She dropped 1, 2, but the third was already raising his weapon. Her hand moved faster than thought. Pistol shot, silence. The boy gasped, chest heaving. His eyes snapped to her, and for the first time he didn't look like a boy, he looked like a soldier. By noon the sun scorched overhead, merciless. Their ammo was nearly gone. Canteens dry. The ridge littered with shell casings, blood, silence. She lay prone, her body trembling with exhaustion. Every muscle screamed, every nerve burned, but her mind was clear. Because she remembered the letter. If you're the last one standing, don't run, stay. Someone has to. Her hand brushed against the broken rifle propped beside her, and she felt him, not as memory, as presence. Her brother. Not a ghost, not a story, but the reason she still drew breath. She whispered so low only she could hear, "I'm here, I'll hold it like you did." And the words gave her strength. The enemy's final push came in the late afternoon. A wall of fire, screams echoing through dust, figures pouring from ridges closer than ever, their voices raw with fury. The survivors fired back with what little they had, some with rifles nearly empty, some with pistols, some with knives clenched white-knuckled in shaking hands. The commander's voice tore ragged, calling them to hold. His body swayed, blood soaking his chest, but still he fought. The boy's rifle clicked empty. He fumbled, panicked. "I'm dry." Without hesitation, she handed him her last magazine. He blinked at her, stunned. "What about you?" She chambered her pistol, her voice calm. "I'll manage." Because holding the line didn't mean never falling. It meant making sure someone else stood when you couldn't. The assault slammed against them, closer, louder, more violent than anything yet. Gunfire lit the ridge in sparks. Men shouted, stones shattered. She fought with pistol, every shot precise, her body moving through exhaustion like it was no longer hers. When the pistol emptied, she swung the broken rifle like a staff, striking, shoving, holding. The boy fired steady, eyes narrowed, no longer calling for her, but fighting beside her. The commander roared, his voice breaking, his hands bloody, still pushing men into line even as he staggered. And somehow, against all odds, the ridge held. Not unbroken, not untouched, but still standing. As dusk fell, the valley quieted. Smoke drifted orange in the fading light. The survivors, only a handful now, sat slumped, silent. The commander collapsed against stone, unconscious but breathing. The boy sat trembling, rifle limp across his knees, his chest heaving with disbelief. And she stood, bruised, bloodied, exhausted beyond words, but still standing. She looked out over the valley. Where shadows had poured, silence now stretched. Where her brother had fallen, she now stood. And she felt it, deep, undeniable, she had carried his line. Not perfectly, not without cost, but she had held. And in the fading light, with the broken rifle resting against her shoulder, she whispered to the silence, "It's done." And for the first time in years, her chest loosened. Because she had not only fought for survival. She had fought for him, for the promise, for the truth. And the truth was this: sometimes the weakest are the ones who learn to hold the longest. What happens after the storm, when silence feels heavier than fire? The ridge no longer roared, it whispered. Wind carried the smell of gunpowder and blood drifting through shattered stone. Smoke curled faintly where grenades had scarred the earth. The survivors, if they could still be called that, sat scattered in shadows. 8 men, maybe 9, each one hollow-eyed, skin gray, lips cracked, staring into nothing. The commander slumped against rock, shirt stiff with dried blood. His chest rose and fell shallow, his head lolling. He was alive, but barely. The boy crouched low, elbows on knees, rifle across his lap. He didn't tremble anymore. His hands were steady, too steady for someone so young. And she stood apart, rifle against her shoulder, scanning the valley below. Because silence didn't mean safety. Not here, not yet. But deep inside she felt it, the shift, the storm had broken. The enemy was gone, for now. Night fell cold. Stars hung sharp above, indifferent to the ground below. The men huddled together for warmth, their breaths fogging the air, their bodies too weary to sleep. She sat apart again, as always, the broken rifle leaning against her pack, her brother's letter folded against her heart. Her own rifle rested across her knees, her hands still wrapped around it though her body begged to let go. The boy moved closer, quietly, like approaching a wild animal. He sat beside her, silent for a long while. Then his voice low, "I don't feel like me anymore." She glanced at him. His face glowed pale in starlight. His eyes were hollow, not wide. "You're not," she said softly. He swallowed hard. "Then what am I?" Her gaze returned to the valley. "Alive." He was quiet, breathing shallow. Then he whispered, "I don't know if I wanted this." Her throat tightened. She thought of her brother, his smile, his laugh, his voice in the letter. "Promise me you won't break." She wanted to tell the boy it would get easier, but that would be a lie. So instead she said what was true: "No one ever does." And in the silence that followed, the boy leaned his head against the stone wall. And for the first time since the battle began, he closed his eyes. At dawn, the ridge was a graveyard. They buried their dead shallow in stony soil that barely gave way to shovels. No crosses, no markers, just rocks piled over bodies. The commander stood unsteady, leaning on two men for support. His face was pale, eyes sunken. He said no words. The boy dug with bleeding hands, dirt caked beneath his nails, sweat mixing with tears he refused to let fall. She dug too, not because she believed in graves here, not because she thought the ground could hold memory, but because leaving the bodies to rot in the sun felt like betrayal. When the last stone was placed, silence pressed heavier than any firefight. The commander whispered hoarsely, almost to himself, "They'll never know their names." Her voice cut through, soft but unshaking, "We will." The boy looked at her then, eyes rimmed red. He said nothing, but he nodded once. Supplies dwindled. Ammunition was nearly gone. Their canteens rattled empty. By afternoon, the survivors faced a choice: stay and starve or move and risk the valley. The commander, leaning heavily on one arm, croaked, "We can't hold anymore. It's time to leave." All eyes turned to her. Her jaw clenched, her chest ached, because leaving felt like betrayal. Her brother had died here. His rifle still leaned against her pack, heavy as stone. But she looked at the faces around her, hollow, broken, waiting. And she knew this line had been held long enough. Her voice came steady, "We move." The descent was slow, painful. Every step over rock felt like a wound reopening. Every shadow in the valley felt like an ambush waiting. She walked last, always last, covering their backs with a rifle nearly dry. The boy walked near her, his eyes scanning the ridges with new steadiness. Once he whispered, "Are we really leaving it behind?" Her hand brushed the broken rifle strapped to her pack. Her voice was low but firm. "Not behind, with us." He frowned faintly, not understanding, but someday he would. That night they found a shallow stream cutting through stone. The men drank greedily, water spilling down cracked lips, mud clinging to their skin. She crouched by the edge, filling her canteen slowly, watching the ripples spread. Her reflection stared back, bruised, blood-streaked, eyes sunken, lips dry. But behind her own face, for a flicker, she thought she saw his, her brother. She blinked, it was gone, only her remained. Her chest tightened. She whispered into the stream, "I'm still here, because of you." The water carried the words away. The commander found her later, staggering, his body failing but his voice sharper than it had been in days. "I misjudged you," he rasped, "from the start." She turned, meeting his sunken eyes. He continued, his voice breaking, "I thought you were too soft, too quiet, but it wasn't weakness. It was something I lost a long time ago." Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. Because forgiveness was not hers to give. He lowered his gaze. "I don't know how you carried us, but you did." And in that moment, he was no longer a commander, just a man broken like the rest. The boy came to her as the stars rose again. His voice was softer now, but clearer. "When we get home," he whispered, "what will you tell them about him?" Her breath caught, her brother, his rifle, his last stand. She closed her eyes, felt the weight of his letter in her vest pocket. Her voice came low, certain, "The truth." The boy frowned. "They won't want to hear it." Her eyes opened steady. "Then I'll tell it anyway." Because some lines weren't meant for glory, they were meant for dignity. And dignity didn't shout, it stayed. That night she lay awake under the stars, her rifle across her knees, the broken one against her side. She thought of the men buried on the ridge, of the boy beside her, not yet broken but never the same, of the commander, fatting but still breathing, and of her brother, his voice in her chest, his presence in every breath she took. She closed her eyes, and in the silence she finally let herself feel it. Not pride, not triumph. Grief. Grief that burned and softened at once. And when she opened her eyes again, the stars looked different. Not indifferent, just distant. And she whispered to the sky, "Tomorrow we walk, and when I speak of you they'll know, you weren't reckless, you weren't weak. You were the line and I held it." Her voice cracked, but she didn't look away. Because survival wasn't the end. Survival was the weight. And she was strong enough to carry it. Why do victories feel so empty when the cost is written in faces you'll never see again? Weeks later, the ridge was far behind. The mountains thinned, the valleys opened. Roads appeared, signs of a world that still breathed, still moved while theirs had stopped. The survivors limped into base under a pale morning sun. Their uniforms were tattered, boots shredded, eyes hollow. They didn't march, they drifted. No cheers, no brass band, just the creak of gates, the hum of generators, the metallic clang of boots on steel flooring. She walked last as always, the boy at her side, the commander ahead leaning on a crutch. And when they crossed the threshold, people stared, not in celebration, not yet, but in disbelief. Because no one expected them to return at all. Inside the debriefing room, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Clean uniforms, pressed collars, polished shoes. Officers sat behind long tables, their eyes sharp but detached. The survivors sat opposite, shoulders slumped, hands raw, eyes clouded. Questions came like bullets, cold, precise, without pause. How many engaged? How long was the ridge held? What was the ratio of firepower? The commander answered hoarsely, voice breaking mid-sentence, pausing to swallow, blood still in his throat. The boy said nothing. His eyes flicked from face to face, unreadable. And she waited, hands on her knees, back straight, silent. Until an officer finally turned to her. "And you? The record shows you had no official command, yet reports say you directed the defense. Explain." Her pulse slowed. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder. She looked at the officer, then at the men beside her. And she said simply, "I did what I had to." The officer frowned. "That's not an answer." Her jaw tightened. Her hand brushed against her chest, feeling the folded letter hidden there. Her voice steadied. "We were supposed to break, we didn't." The room shifted, uneasy, uncomfortable. But she said no more. Because the truth was already heavier than words. Later, when the others were dismissed, she remained behind. The commander lingered near the doorway, pale, unsteady. His voice rasped. "They'll never understand what you carried up there." She met his eyes, and in them she saw no rank anymore, no arrogance, only a man hollowed out by loss. Her reply was soft, "They don't need to." He swallowed hard, tried to speak, failed, then nodded once and left. She stayed seated in the empty room, the hum of lights surrounding her, her brother's letter pressing against her chest. And for the first time since the ridge, she unfolded it. The paper was torn, edges worn from being touched too many times. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. But don't break. Promise me you won't. You'll carry more than you should, but you'll carry it better than I ever could." Her throat burned. She pressed the letter to her lips and whispered, "I kept it. I kept the line." Weeks turned into months. The survivors scattered back to their lives, if lives could be rebuilt from rubble. The boy was sent home. When he boarded the transport, he paused at the gate, turned back, looked at her. His voice cracked, but he said it anyway. You saved me." She shook her head softly. "No, you saved yourself." But he didn't believe it. He saluted awkwardly, then disappeared. The commander never returned to the field. His injuries ended his career. Some said he spent his final years quiet, withdrawn, writing letters he never sent. As for her, she remained. Not for glory, not for recognition, but because she couldn't walk away while others still faced what she had survived. Yet even as time passed, the story of the ridge traveled, whispers first, then reports, then myths. Some called it a miracle, others called it reckless. But none of them knew the truth. Not the cold nights under shattered stone. Not the shallow graves carved into rock. Not the letter carried against her heart. And she never corrected them. Because the truth didn't need to be told loudly. It just needed to be remembered. One evening she walked alone along the outskirts of base, the sky painted orange with setting sun. The air smelled of dust and distant smoke. Children played near the fence line, their laughter rising into the air, sharp and alive. She paused watching them, their innocence, their unbrokenness. And for a fleeting second she felt the weight lift. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. Because maybe holding the line wasn't about glory. Maybe it was about making sure laughter still had room to exist. Years later, when her name was mentioned at briefings or whispered in barracks, soldiers asked, what was she like? Some said she was cold. Others said she was unshakable. A few said nothing at all, only lowered their heads. But those who had stood beside her, those who had buried their brothers in stony soil, those who had heard her voice in the silence of night, they knew. She wasn't loud. She wasn't the hero they painted in posters. She was something else. A quiet strength, a line that held when all others broke. And when her story finally reached beyond barracks and reports, it wasn't told with fanfare. It was told in fragments, in pauses, in silences between words. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And the image that lingered, the one that refused to fade, wasn't of her firing a rifle or standing on a ridge or walking through gates unbroken. It was of her sitting beneath the stars, eyes hollow, letter pressed against her heart, whispering into silence. Not for recognition, not for history, but for memory. Because some lines aren't drawn in glory. They're drawn in sacrifice. And hers was written in silence that will never be forgotten.